Welcome, Dag.
Thank you, Cam.
Today on Building Giants, we have Dag Larsson, CEO and co-founder of Doccla. Doccla is the leading virtual ward company. It's providing remote patient monitoring and building virtual hospitals across Europe and throughout the UK. They're operating in 10 countries across Europe and are the trusted provider for the NHS. You also announced a £35 million Series B raised, led by Lakestar, which is going to be used to turbocharge the company and dominate the whole of Europe. Going back to the very beginning, what was the genesis of the company?
So it all started with Martin Ratz, as you mentioned. He himself experienced a heart attack. Otherwise healthy, mid-40s, with 3 kids, and then being in the hospital after surgery, having all the monitoring in the world, 12 lead ECG, and then the moment he leaves the hospital, there's nothing. So it's very, very strange, right? This system was designed in the 40s, and it didn't take into account all the tech we have today.
I mean, you and I initially bonded over being keen but mediocre surfers.
Yeah, very mediocre.
Very mediocre.
Yeah,
you was CPO of Viaplay, which is sort of like the Swedish Netflix, which you saw go from 0 to 100 million as CPO.
Yeah.
Then you had a sports hardware startup of sorts. And now you're the CEO of Doccla, a UK-based healthcare startup. So what brought you to it?
Well, a couple of lessons. I think like the surfing, if we start to that, which is more fun, it's just a lot of grit, right? I think like if you start surfing at an older age, which I've done, you mostly paddle, you struggle. And that's
face plant.
Yeah, and I think that's true for a startup as well. It's mostly paddling, and it's not so exotic. And if you then jump to the streaming experience, I think it just gave me a deep-founded belief that if something, like if the technology ought to change our behavior, it sooner or later will. And I think that's definitely true for streaming. Like you've seen it with Spotify and with different types of...
It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, it's just, it will happen, right? And then obviously with Doccla, we've been extremely lucky because the pandemic accelerated the behavioral change, and then also reimbursement in the UK accelerated behavioral change. But I think you have to have that belief, right?
Yeah.
So I think, and also like I thoroughly enjoyed the craziness of scaling a company. When it comes to the hardware sports startup that I dabbled into, I think like don't do hardware. That was another lesson. So I have tremendous respect for all of the hardware providers that we partner with, because that's really hard.
I see all those lessons that you've brought them through to Doccla. You timed this wave well. When we met, I thought you had just the perfect amount of crazy in your eyes, to be honest. Those are some great key lessons that you've brought with you. But back to the company. You've had a real impact now at Doccla, over 4 million monitored days. When did you kind of have that moment? We talk about startups and going 0 to 1 and then 1 to 10. When did you kind of know you had product market fit and it was really working?
It was probably 23, so like a year after our Series A.
Okay.
And that's the year when the UK market really started maturing. There were lots of public procurements, so lots of tenders.
Okay.
And I think during that year we won 9 out of 11 tenders.
Wow.
And
that's kind of unheard of.
Yeah, it hasn't happened. It's very, very unusual, right? And I think what we saw was that we were really, really differentiated. So like the company that we built was just like, I think performed, it fitted in with the market so much better. And I think that's because we built our company for our users, for the payers, for the patients, and not so much for you lot, like the investors, right? And I think in the end of the day, that builds a better company.
I mean, maybe just give people a story. When we led your seed round, I remember it was a very contrarian take to do the operations and the logistics. But you were very clear-eyed, even at that point, that you can't just sell software into hospitals. That's not solving the problem for them. You've really got to take the full stack, solve the full problem for them, and that's how you will deliver value. And we also, as your investors, thought that kind of laser focus on the problem, on the clinicians and the patients was ultimately the winning formula, and it's proven to be so far. Given you just raised your Series B, a big milestone in every company's journey, I really feel that sort of the seed to Series B is one segment, and then it's the Series B to IPO is the next segment. And you've now hit the Series B mark. What do you think allowed you to raise that round? And what would be your advice to other founders watching this if they want to raise a Series B round of that size?
Well, everything is unique, right? So
sure.
What made us be able to do it?
I think you had phenomenal metrics. An exceptional team that was uniquely suited to building the business, and incredible customer love.
Yeah. I do think we have been able to grow in a way which is unusual for European health tech.
Yes.
I think we've been able to grow much faster than you typically do. And I think that's because on the one hand, we've been very lucky with timing. There's been reimbursement. And on the other hand, we've been contrarian. So we've been different in the market. So on a fundamental level, I think that's the first thing. And then I do think that the investors that we, in the end of the day, got attracted by our proposition, they understand that this is going to be a huge market. Like they instinctively understand that. So I think those are the two fundamental things. A couple of years ago, I mean, Doccla was almost like an anecdote, right? It's a couple of contracts. This is going well. This isn't going so well. And then if you look today, we can really understand the movements in the customer base and on the patient level, on the clinician level. So I think
it's night and day.
Yeah, I mean, you stop running the company on anecdotes, right? And you start running it through data.
I want to kind of change tack now and go back to yourself as a leader. Dag Larsson has actually become a sort of giant phenotype now in some of our discussions. The no-nonsense executor operator, slightly allergic to investors and fundraising processes, but an exceptional executor and deliverer. So how have you grown as a leader, and how would you kind of, I know it's hard sometimes to speak about yourself, but how would you sort of describe your leadership style?
So first of all, I don't think we haven't really built Doccla to be centered around me, right? Or Martin, for that matter, either. I think the North Star of Doccla is the patients we support and the clinicians we support. And I think if we go into an all hands, like sure, me and Martin is there and we're kind of guiding things and we have our say, but we start with a patient story and then we continue with how is our business performing? How are the different systems that we work with performing? Who's recruiting more patients? Who's recruiting less? And there's a conversation in front of the entire company about what's working and what isn't working, right? So I think that's been a constant. I think I've been trying to be more deliberate about my leadership as the company has matured, but by putting these kind of practices in, by putting the ceremonies in, gathering people around our North Star. I think when you start as a CEO in a company, you're really more kind of a project manager. It's more just about like executing around a small team of like 4 to 10 people. So I'd say like just transitioning there in a more deliberate way has been something I've been trying to work on, right? And then there's a couple of things that I can get better on. I've always loved being in the details.
Yeah, I was going to say you've always been incredibly detail-oriented, I think.
That's I think that's on balance better. It's better to be more in the details than less in the details and just delegate freely, right? But I think in my case, like it got probably out of hand at some point as well. As the company grows and you have like 150 Slack channels, and if you're plugged into each of those Slack channels, be it clinical incidents, be it customer service issues, be it every installation. Literally, I was looking at like every installation.
It's a lot of notifications.
Like, every implementation, right? And like the first thing I did in the morning, the last thing I did before going to bed. I mean, there's an opportunity cost to that, right? So I'm trying to balancing that more, right? And then a third thing I would say, I actually wished we would have invested more in data earlier. We were not late by any stretch of the imagination, but we could have been even earlier in setting up our data lakes and pooling data together, because it gave us quite a lot of insights, right? If I can have a fourth thing, I would say like
you can
work even more on the talent.
Yes.
Like on the talent pipeline. So I think like, I don't know, I'm not sure that's leadership or if it's tactical, but those are the things I've been reflecting on, right?
Yeah, I know. I think we've had some of those conversations. At some point you are only as good as the people you hire, right?
Yeah. And it's one of the few things you do control, right? It's kind of
every startup faces failure. You guys have had a remarkable growth trajectory, but of course there's been road bumps along the way. How do you approach failure, and has your perspective on that changed from when you started to today?
Yeah, I handle failure poorly, right? First of all, like I want to admit that, right? I'm not good with failure.
Yeah, I've always thought that there's that school of thought where we sort of glamorize failure, but you almost need to have an allergy to failure, I think.
Yeah, kind of internalize it, etc. Right? So I think like there's a couple of things. There's one, how do you express failure internally, right? So it doesn't become doom and gloom.
Sure.
how do I, who handles failures poorly, don't transmit that into the organization, right? So that's something I'm trying to be very deliberate about. I mean, the second thing is just like, I don't have a need to be like the popular football coach that the entire kind of football team gathers around and other things like.
Respected, not loved.
I just want to win. I want to win the next game, right?
Yes.
I want to win, and then the next game, and then the next game, and then the next game.
You're an Alex Ferguson type.
Yeah, perhaps, right. But I mean, he was loved in the end, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I will be. But like, so I think like instilling that mentality of winning, and when you do have a loss, you understand why, and you fix that, and then you go on and try to win, and then win again, and then win again, right? So I think like, you should just be fueled to become a better team.
Yes.
And be very thoughtful around that.
I think it's refreshing that people have stopped using the family terminology to describe companies and startups, and we're teams, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we're here to win. One of the amazing things about Doccla is the success it's had with the NHS, and the proof is in the pudding, rave reviews. That's pretty rare. A lot of the reasons people have struggled to scale UK health tech startups is because it can be challenging to sell at speed to the NHS, to work with them at scale. So what would be your advice to founders wanting to emulate, sort of the success you've had?
Yeah, I mean, how much time do you have, right?
Yeah.
But I think, first of all, if NHS is supposed to be a material part of your business, it needs to be very important for the NHS, and there needs to be funding. So you don't end up just being a kind of a string of pilots, right?
Okay.
You need to look at that,
so
right?
Top-down funding.
Yeah, top-down, or it's like massive kind of support for it. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that you have to understand that implementing your product or services is your responsibility. If you think that they are going to do this really well, some will, like there's exceptions, right? But you will have to take responsibility of the actual implementation on a very, very hands-on way.
Yes.
So I think those are the two pitfalls that a lot of people do. That there might not be a market, right? And you're better served using NHS as many companies do actually as a test bed, and then scale it somewhere else.
Makes sense. The third element we have at Giant in terms of our checklist is it needs to be a hair on fire problem for the people on the front lines. Delivering healthcare. If you have those three, then maybe there's a chance.
Yeah, indeed.
What was the most meaningful moment for you so far in building Doccla?
Yeah, I think if it gets, because sometimes building a company, it's a lot of paddling, right? It's a lot of emails, long nights, etc. But I think like the more we as humans connect with the patients, the better it makes me feel, right?
Sure, of course.
Disregarding building a business and all of that. I mean, there was one story where a customer service agent called, her name is Danny. She doesn't work with us anymore, but like amazing person. And I remember when she was onboarding a patient, that is explaining the kit and explaining the medical devices for the patient. She connected really well to the guy, and he had a really tragic story of some recent loss, and he also then had a history of falls. And that means that he was falling over quite a time. There's a lot of old people living like this, and quite a few of them are they're quite lonely as well. So he was expressing that he was lonely, and it was so nice to speak to Danny. She was such a human to him, etc. And then something we're doing for patients that aren't submitting their readings is that we make compliance calls, right? And she was calling the patient, and she was very quick to notice that he wasn't picking up. And she went out of the protocol at the time. This was early days, and instantly contacted the healthcare provider that we were working with and said, like, yeah, he noted that this guy had a fall. And obviously they sent out somebody to the site, and he was lying there.
Oh, wow.
Fully, couldn't move, like on the floor. And, just that one case, in a sense, like, is very meaningful, right? This is somebody's...
literally saving a life.
Yeah, this is somebody's father, this is somebody's granddad, right? And he was just like lying there, couldn't move. And this is what we do, right? We don't have to have, some lofty, democratizing mission. We help patients every day, right? And that is deeply meaningful.
Individual human lives, yeah.
And then we can get better at it. Okay, let's bring in a fall detector. Let's bring in this tech. Let's automate these alarms, right? We can use, to my point earlier, we can use all of this data to just get better. but like just helping people live a more dignified life and not like it's really, really nice. Like it's a nice thing to do.
If Danny's watching, well, thank you, Danny.
Yeah. And so I, in hard moments, I kind of I bring that back, right? And it wasn't through me, but it was, I played a part, right?
For sure,
and that's
for
nice.
sure. One thing also that we haven't talked about much is that, we led your seed round during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So there was this whole dynamic.
Yeah.
We met in one of the brief openings between lockdowns. I mean, there was also that stress of like what was coming down the pipe at Christmas, COVID. I remember that being stressful.
Yeah.
Even the best co-founding relationships always have tension. You've always struck me as a remarkably sort of cohesive and harmonious, co-founding team. So yeah, any tips or secrets or insights there?
Well, it's more thanks to Martin than to me, I would say. On one level, I've probably raised.
You seem quite combative.
I've raised my voice probably a couple of times more than he has. But I think like on a fundamental level, what's good about me and Martin is that we really agree on the principles of how to run a company.
Yes.
Like thoroughly agree, but we really don't want each other's jobs. So like for him to work on the tech, on the compliance, on the operations, like that's like he does not want to do that, right? And he shouldn't. And for me to work like enterprise sales, I shouldn't. And I can do it, right? And the same, right? We can cover for each other. But I think like that's a really good, like if you are in a kind of co-founding moment, like don't be too similar to where you want to put your focus on.
Yeah.
And that has been very lucky with me and Martin.
I've seen that. Clear ownership, and then 1 + 1 can equal 3.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very rare that you see me and Martin in the same meeting.
What makes Doccla different? Why do you think it's been so successful, partnering with healthcare providers like the NHS?
Yeah. Well, first of all, as mentioned, we've been lucky with timing. Pandemic and reimbursement has kind of arrived and is arriving at the moment. And then secondly, while I feel like a lot of our competitors were building these extremely software esque companies, and doing that because they were pitching to VCs. To be frank, we spent 2.5 years completely funded by revenue, and we were building towards the clients, right? So we created this company that was in 3 companies: a software company, a clinical delivery or Amazon, and also a clinical provider, and that's really hard to do.
Yes. It's like 3 businesses in one.
Exactly, and then cultural operation, everything, but it's also solving the entire problem in a way that the competition doesn't seem to be that interested in doing.
Yeah, if I may use some VC speak, I think you really solved the problem from first principles. Really kind of kept the main thing with which is let's solve this problem for clinicians and patients as best we can, and not build a business that VCs or whoever wants to find.
Yeah. It looks good in Excel, but not in practicality.
A lot of cash in the bank. What is next for Doccla? Where do you see Doccla in 10 years from now?
So again, we're building a virtual hospital for all of Europe. And if we during this month we onboard more than 1,000 patients every month, we do think we're going to onboard hundreds of thousands of patients every month in just like a set number of years, right? We're building
which would make you by far the biggest hospital in Europe.
Oh yeah.
Far away.
But by far, right?
So let's fast forward 10 years from now. Doccla has scaled across Europe. It's the leading hospital by some margin in Europe and perhaps beyond. What does that world look like?
So I think if we start with the patient, let's start with the patient. I think it will be completely natural to be much more on top of your health in a proactive way, right? So the wearable sensors has gotten even better. You can even, you can use your mobile phone, etc. And all of these improvements have been integrated into either to the local clinician's workflow or to ours, right? So you'll be on top of your health and you'll understand when you start getting worse, right? And as you go into the hospital, I think there's this talk about hospital with no walls. I think it literally must be a hospital with no walls, right?
Like continuum.
Yeah, there'll be a continuum, both from a practice sense, but also like going in and out. You can't have this like binary wall and then there's nothing, right? So we will, on a very deep level, facilitate this.
I do think the Amazon is a good comparison, putting the consumer at the heart of it.
Yeah.
And then building this full infrastructure that doesn't exist today to enable a whole different mode of healthcare.
Exactly, because healthcare is so diverse and so messy. You can't just have, you think you could have one Apple Watch product, like it's not going to work. You will have to rely on so many different types of devices, so many different types of players all contributing to the ecosystem. And we really want to be that enabler of all of this. So like, I don't think me and Martin was like that great at fundraising.
No.
When we
When you started.
when we did our seed round, right? Maybe not now either, right? So what made you see through that and actually write the first check?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think you're pretty good at fundraising now, given the B round that just got closed. But yeah, you're right. And for that reason, it was actually a bit of a heated debate at Giant whether to do the investment. But you know, what do we see? I think I saw three things. I saw a really mission-driven team. And I think that for us is super important. I saw a really nice blend in the co-founding team between you and Martin. You being a hardcore, no-nonsense executor and operator, and Martin being sort of a fantastic salesman, sort of with healthcare experience. And I really liked the blend. I think the second thing that helped us see through it is, you talked about surfing and catching waves and timing, and I felt very strongly that the pandemic was kind of like the force majeure that was going to tip even the slow-moving NHS into kind of a model that clearly made so much sense and was going to be a big part of the future. And then thirdly, I think I loved your guys' relentless focus on the customer, who in this case is the healthcare providers and the patients. That really came through even back then, and I think even against kind of maybe the kind of obstacle of VC saying we want you to be more software. You guys held really firm to that, and we looked at it and we felt that really did make sense. And even though margins might be slightly lower or whatever, that was the winning model. And I loved the kind of conviction you guys had in that, and that came through in the customer calls and references we did. But it was, I will say, a contrarian investment, I think, at the time for many, many reasons. And one of the great joys of this work is taking a bit of a bet on some exceptional people with a big idea that other people might not agree with at the time, and then seeing it flourish.
How would you say that we have changed, both as a leadership team and a company during the last couple of years?
I think both you and Martin have grown in confidence and have really been quite exceptional at taking on feedback in wherever you sort of have maybe some gaps and really growing into that. So we talked about data. I think that was a big discussion at the beginning. I think your willingness to go try and succeed in hiring like exceptional talent has been really good. I think Martin's willingness and to kind of put processes into the sales process. Like, I think you guys have that evolution and that kind of growth mindset that we look for, because you never know what's going to come down the pipe with the company. So you need people who can be flexible but always looking to level up, and you guys have had that. I think we had the sort of benefit and enjoyment of a really direct and open and honest relationship from the beginning, and I think that's been really helpful, at least from my perspective. I hope it has from your end.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we wouldn't have been here without that first check and that belief, right? So it means the world for us. And what's your advice for the next 3 years?
I think it's dream big, and believe that Doccla can be the first health tech decacorn in Europe. And I think to just kind of keep the important thing, keep delivering for patients and healthcare systems. And I think your team has an incredibly special opportunity to deliver real meaningful impact at scale for human lives and for the healthcare system as kind of a collective whole, and build an enormous company in the process. It's kind of, those opportunities don't come across very often. So I think I would just remind your team of that, and I know they feel it every day. So
very good.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
We like to end every Building Giants with 3 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Think so, yeah.
What is the number one quality you think it takes for a founder to succeed?
Very hard work and luck. I'm going to add that as well.
What's the number one tactic you would advise for having a successful co-founder relationship?
Choose carefully.
And in the ups and downs of startup life, what's the one thing or activity that really helps keep you grounded and healthy?
Try to have a hobby. Like, that isn't work.
What's yours?
Surfing, so
There we go.
difficult to apply.
Get it once in a while.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, man.
Thank you.
Pleasure.